Okay, good evening, everyone. Here we welcome Professor Ali Nadeem Rezavi and Professor Ranabir Chakraborty at our studio. It is our another initiative, which is Parampara Shuchi Initiative, as Shuchi Special Webinar Session 5. Today we will talk about defining India as nation, its idea and state in the eyes of some medieval Indian writers by Professor Said Ali Nadeem Rezavi of Aligarh Muslim University. And before that, we continue with the lecture. We want to say something about, though you all aware of Professor Rezavi, we want to introduce him. But Said Ali Nadim Rezavi is a professor at the Aligarh Muslim University. He was also chairman and coordinator at the Center for Advanced Studies in History and coordinator of Musa Dakri Museum. He pursued his higher studies from the Aligarh Muslim University itself. Then he did his PhD on the urban middle class and Mughal India. His research interests focus on the history of archaeology of medieval India and on the Mughal dynasty in particular. Among his books include Fatehpur Sikri Revisited from Oxford University Press, History Through Archaeology, Siaka's Department of History, and Tazkira Pirhasut Ali of Surat Singh. These are some books. He has published Catalogue of the Archaeological Holdings of the Archaeological Section, Department of History in 2 volumes, and another exhibition catalogue such as History Through Mughal Miniature, Akbar in Mughal Paintings, Everyday Life in Mughal India, Natural History in Mughal Miniatures. Apart from this, he has contributed chapters to books including Religious Movements and Institutions in Medieval India from Oxford and Religions in Indian History, and authored almost 50 papers published in reputed journals. He has been appointed as one of the 2 editors of the forthcoming 6th volume of the Comprehensive History of India. At West Bengal Calcutta CAST, that is Center for Archaeological Studies and Training, Eastern India, is an invited fellow. He also got the SWAS Fellow, Indian Charles Wallace Fellow at the Center of South Asian Studies, School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. He has also held some prestigious positions, Professor Rezavi, in medieval section of Paschim Bango Itihas সংসদ. He was the president of sectional president, and he also was the sectional president of Indian History Congress. Other than this, general president of UP History Congress and medieval sectional president in Punjab Historical Conference. The most important thing I want to mention, the editorial advisory body member, the Shia's Heritage of South Asia series, the Shia Institute, London, and one of the important today's Association for the Study of History and Archaeology, which is ASHA since February 1998. It is going nice, even in the online platform. He was awarded Professor J.S. Graiwal Best Paper Award in Medieval Indian section of IHC in 2003 and M. Athar Ali Best Paper Award presented during the 70th session of Indian History Congress for the Best Paper presentation during 69th session of IHC held at Kannur. He also delivered some prestigious symposium in Indian History Congress, University of Mumbai, and also he invited to deliver such a series of lectures on Mughal history and architecture postgraduate students of the University of Bates at the United States. Also at École Pratique des Hautes section des Sciences Historiens et Philologues, Sorbonne, Paris, in 2008. Professor Rezavi has edited a number of journals and organized many exhibitions He held various administrative posts too in the MU. He is very active in online platforms as we have already known him, has delivered as well as a lot of web-based lecture series and webinars. And we must mention the History Learner group, which is very famous in Facebook and this online platform. A Facebook page dedicated to history for the benefit of students and dedicated to the study of Indian history in general and medieval India in particular. And also, we have also mentioned about ASHA, Aligarh Society of History and Archaeology. Through this and the Ganga Jamuni lecture series, there are so many interesting online lectures organized by him. And so we welcome Professor Ali Nadeem Rezavi at Suchi platform. Nadeem, and it is really honored to have you with us. Namaste.
Thank you very much. I mean, for such an exaggerated introduction. But, dear friends, fellow historians, as well as students who are connecting today, I will be talking about the idea of India as a nation and the concept of its state in medieval period of our history, starting from the writings of Al-Biruni down to the concept as presented in the Akbarnama of Abul Fazl. But first of all, before I start, let me thank the Society of Understanding Culture in India, SUCI, under whose banner this lecture is being organized. I must also thank Dr. Kaushik Saha, its energetic secretary, who thought of inviting a person like me to be before this August gathering. Having been his acquaintance and having attended some previous talks of Suchi, I can say that the ideals of this society and those of Aligarh Society of History and Archaeology, ASHA, which I represent here, are the same. The percolation and dissemination of a past shorn of all religious prejudices. A past based on facts and not one based on imagined myths. I chose this topic because I think that in present day India, which is overwhelmingly belligerent and under the burden of an intolerant nationalism based on a mythical glorious past, and in the face of attempts being made to paint the medieval period as a dark, bleak period of Islamic atrocities, we have forgotten how the 10th, 11th century to 17th century shaped us into what we are today. Since a few years, we are being told that we are a nation since our very hoary past, the Vedic age. And just like the Orientalists of the yore asserted, our history is static since earliest times and nothing emerged gradually. The terms nation and nationalism may have modern origins, but according to them, India, that is Bharat, was a nation even during the Vedic times. What I am going to present here is not exclusively my own views. I am going to present before you the sum total of the views already presented by two highly respected scholars of medieval India, Professor late Professor M. Atharali and Professor Irfan Habib. I am referring to Professor M. Atharali's paper on Abul Fazl and Akbar's perception of India, published way back in 1996 in Social Scientist, and two very important papers of Irfan Habib, one on Idea of India and the other on Zia Barni, both published in 1999. And of course, I would also be referring to the edited text of Zia Barni and the introduction, which Professor Muhammad Habib had written to his text on Jahandari. I too contribute to this debate through two of my papers. One, which was on Al Beruni, published in 2020, and another on Amir Khusro, published in 2004. Let us go first to some background, as did Professor M. Athar Ali and Irfan Habib. We know that geographical knowledge is a prerequisite before the concept of a nation can arise. We need not be surprised then that as far as India is concerned, such a concept is not present in the Vedas. The first firm evidence of the idea of India is perhaps no older, according to Irfan Habib, no older than Gautam Buddha's time, some 2500 years ago, when we first hear of the 16 Mahajanpadas, which together comprised northern India and parts of Afghanistan. But it is with the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka the Great and his inscriptions found all over India, datable from around 250 BC, that we find one of India's early names, Jambu Deep, the Pali form of Jambu Dweep, used in Ashoka's Rock Edict 1, which is used for the country as a whole. The cultural affinities of the Indian people, isolated from others by high mountain ranges in the north and by the Indian Ocean in the south, could only be marked more certainly when there was knowledge of other people outside of these borders. People, that is, who could be seen as culturally different. Ashoka, in his Rock Edict 13, uh, uh, when he talks about Yonas, Greeks, being different because they had no Shamanas and Brahmanas. Thus, a cultural distinction could reinforce a territorial one. A similar distinction occurs in the reference made in Manusmriti to foreigners, that is, Malechas. There are lands where Brahmanas do not perform sacrifice or the twice born dwell. The listing of India's regions in the Mahabharata or Samudragupta's Allahabad inscription or Kalidas's Meghdut underlined again a fairly distinct concept of India as a geographical and cultural world of its own. The concept could indeed lead to rigid insularity. The Iranians had long extended this version of the name of the Sindhu River, which they called Hindu, changing Sa for Ha, Sa into Ha, which according to them was the country lying along and beyond the river. Whence came the name India by the Greeks, given by the Greeks, and even possibly the Chinese Yin too. In post-Hellenistic Iran, territorial names began to be given the suffix stan, so that Hind or Hindu would become Hindustan, on the analogy of other Iranian territorial names like Sistan, Gurjistan, Khuzistan, etc. Hindustan, just like the name Hind, is an entirely Iranian word. The style of writing Hindustan, as if it is a Sanskrit word meaning land of the Hindus, is a modern invention. The word in this form is unknown to classical Sanskrit. We must also remind ourselves that the word Hindu too is of purely Iranian origin, meaning an inhabitant of Hindustan or India. It was taken from the Iranians by the Arabs and Muslims in general, among whom, up till the time of Al-Biruni, there was little reason to distinguish between those who were Indians and those who, besides being Indians, followed religious sects other than Islam. Once the Muslims established themselves in large parts of India, the 13th century onwards, the latter restrictive meaning of the word began to predominate, and Hindu assumed a religious color. But the Hindus themselves, by the Hindus themselves, the name was not accepted before the latter half of the 14th century, when the Vijayanagar ruler and later the ruler of Mewar are found styling themselves Hindu sultans. In fact, they write, Vijayanagar ruler in his inscriptions writes Hindu Suratana. Simultaneously, words Hindi and Hindustan came into use for Indians in general. The designations being used by the poets Amir Khusro, 14th century, and Isami, when they spoke of both the Hindus and Muslim inhabitants of this country taken together. Let us start with the 11th century, when we have Al-Biruni, who came to India along with Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni. While studying Indian civilization in his Arabic work, the Kitabul Hind, written in around 1035 AD at Lahore, he commented adversely on the Indians' sense of isolation. They believed, he said, there was no other country like theirs, and had no desire to learn about or from other peoples. I'll quote this a little later as well. Al-Biruni's own book, whose writings the famous historian K.N. Panikkar described as a moment in history, is itself the evolution of the comprehension of India as a cultural entity. It is the first comprehensive study of Indian civilization. This fact reminds us that the consciousness of one's belonging to a country can also be reinforced by outsiders' realization that its inhabitants have institutions and features different from theirs. Al-Biruni was able to give, in the words of Professor M. Athar Ali, a precise geographical definition of Al-Hind, the country which was limited in the south by the Indian Ocean and all three other sides by the lofty mountains, the Himalayas, the water of which flowed down as rivers from it to irrigate the land. He further identified the land extending southwards from the Himalayas as Bharatvarsha, which was the center of Jambudweep, belying the notion that this Bharatvarsha was the entire inhabitable world, as believed by some ancient Brahmanical writings. In actual fact, it was what he had described as Al-Hind. Further, its inhabitants were, according to Al-Biruni, called Hindus, the residents of Hind, thus not a religious community at all, who had a culture of their own, with Sanskrit as their language. Al-Biruni thus saw a firm cultural unity, the insularity of which he, however, regretted and which he labeled as their national character. And I read out a passage from Al-Baruni regarding this insularity of the national character. And I quote, "We can only say folly is an illness for which there is no medicine. And the Hindus believe that there is no country but theirs, no nation like theirs, no king like theirs, no religion like theirs, no science like theirs. They are haughty, foolishly vain, self conceited, and stolid. They are by nature niggardly in communicating that which they know, and they take the greatest possible care to withhold it from men of another caste among their own people, still much more, of course, from any foreigner. According to their belief, there is no other country on earth but theirs, no other race of man but theirs, and no created beings beside them have any knowledge or science whatsoever. Their haughtiness is such that if you tell them of any science or scholar in Khorasan and Persia, they will think you to be both ignoramus and a liar." And I stress this last sentence, which I am quoting from Al-Baruni. If they traveled and mixed with other nations, they would soon change their mind, for their ancestors were not as narrow minded as the present generation is. Unquote. Now, this passage, if you pay attention, uh, reflects what is happening in India today as well. If we are looking for patriotic statements about India and its natural and cultural greatness, then surely Amir Khusro and his Nuh Sepeher, which he had compiled in 1318 in Persian, must be identified as the earliest and clearest of such statements. The Amir Khusro lauds love for one's country, Hubbul Watani or Hubbe Watan. His country, which he calls Hind, he says, contains people speaking different languages, which he lists as Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam, in fact, is not mentioned by him, probably because it was not there at that particular moment of time. All these languages he calls Hindavi or Indian. He uses the term Hindavi languages in plural. And he says that these Hindavi languages are used by common people for all purposes. Besides them, he praises Sanskrit, the language of the learned, for its rich literature. He carefully records that Persian too has become a language of India because people have learned it since the coming of the Hurrians and Turks. Here is then a picture of the Indian people with their various languages yet constituting a single whole. What makes Khosrau's verses specially patriotic is the avowed argument of the precedence of India over other countries. He speaks of the superiority of its products and fruits, its animals, the beauty of its women, the learning and piety of the Brahmins, and India's numerous cultural achievements such as the invention of numerals and chess, the compilation of Panchatantra, which came to be known as Kalilodamna. Clearly, such a comprehensive picture of India and its culture, which is seen, is not as inclusive as Al-Baruni had judged it, but open to all, innovative and tolerant, reveals a new understanding that could only have come because conditions had changed. This change was surely the one due to the confluence of two civilizations, ancient Indian and Islamic, that had now taken place, a momentous confluence which Professor M. Athar Ali correctly describes as medieval efflorescence. Amir Khusro was born at Patiali in modern district of Eta in Uttar Pradesh in 1253. His father, Amir Saifuddin Mahmud, was a Turk who had migrated to India during the reign of Iltutmish, some years prior to the birth of Khusro. He came from a city known as Kush, which is now known as Shahrizabs in Uzbekistan. His mother was the daughter of Imadul Mulk, a noble of Delhi. What Amir Khusro wrote was actually an echo of what Al-Biruni had said earlier. But unlike the former, Khusro, being a born Indian, proclaimed his patriotism as well. He took pride in it being his watan, the love of which was a part of Iman. A few decades later, in 1350, another person to write his ode to India was Abdul Malik Isami. Isami wrote a history of Muslim rule in India and called it, mark the title which he had given to his book, Shahnamai-Hind, now popularly known as Futuhus Salatin. And in this work, Isami wrote, and I quote him, "Blessed is the splendor of the country of Hindustan, for heaven itself is envious of this scented garden." Unquote. As against Al-Biruni, Khusro, and Isami, we have Zia Barni, the author of two important works, Tarikh-e-Feroz Shahi and Fatawa-e-Jahandari. Though an orthodox Muslim, Barni characterized the Delhi Sultanate as a non-theocratic state. Nowhere in his account does he mention India as a distinct nation, unlike the other authors which I quoted before. However, the Sultanate to him was not established or was functioning on the basis of Islamic law Shariat, but it was being regulated through Zawabit or secular state laws. In his advice number 14, noted in his Fatawa-e-Jahandari, Muhammad Habib has translated this. Barni says, and I quote the translation of Muhammad Habib, "A zabita or state law is the technique of administration. It is a rule of action which a king imposes as an obligatory duty upon himself for realizing the welfare of the state and from which he absolutely never deviates." Unquote. Though favoring ruling classes and elites, these zawabit, nevertheless, were non-religious and secular. They were not based on any religious texts or their interpretations by the ulama, but upon the opinion of the king or the advisors of the king as to what was good for his kingdom and his people. Barni leaves us in no doubt that in cases of conflict, the Zawabit state law overrode the Shariat. Further, this viewpoint, as put forward by Barni, was a direct reversal of the theory of kingship as propounded earlier by Sultan Balban. I'm not going into the details of Sultan Balban's theory, but suffice to say that it was the divine theory of kingship, based on the concept of the Islamic, prophethood, um, and the concept of God. Irfan Habib too argued that in his Tarikh and in Fatawa, Zia Barni admits that in the interests of the state, Hindus had to be tolerated. In fact, in his Tarikh, he makes it a point to mention Jalaluddin Khalji as having said that in his dominions, Hindus were wealthy and prosperous and freely enjoyed the rights to worship idols and beat drums and celebrate their festivals. It is also important to note that Zia Barni in his Tarikh considered concessions given to the Hindu rural aristocracy or the employment of Hindu officers in high positions in the Sultanate as reasonable. He does not protest against any such measures, but mentions them approvingly. That religious barriers continue to exist is a fact which cannot be denied. But then, as Irfan Habib stated, all cultures in the world have had internal tensions. Yet, Kabir, the Muslim weaver around 1510, could, through his dohas, condemn both Hinduism and Islam and their sacred rituals in the sharpest of terms. And Nanak could float a separate religion independent of both Islam and Hinduism. Both Kabir and Nanakji were the products of the same state. Just to cite two verses from Kabir. कांकर पाथर जोड़ के मस्जिद लिए चुनाए. Gathering pebbles and stones, they built their mosque. ता चढ़मुल्ला बांग दे के बहरा हुआ खुदाए. The mullah shouts on the top of his voice from the turret. Wonder whether God is deaf. कुबुद्धि को सूझे नहीं. उठ उठ देवल जाए. दिल देहरा की खबर नहीं. पत्थर कहां से पाए. Fools can't think. They keep visiting temples in search of God without realizing their self. If they search their own hearts, they would find one which eludes them in these stone idols. So, a milieu, the type of climate which prevailed during this period of time was one where a person like Kabir, who was a weaver by caste, could criticize vehemently both the religions, Hinduism and Islam. With Akbar, the perception of India as a home to different traditions, interacting and adjusting with each other, received a fresh reinforcement. An impetus was given to both pantheism and rationalism. This is clearly visible in the writings of Mullah Abdul Qadir Badayuni, who compiled his secret history, Muntakhab Tawarikh. He alludes to the fact that the Muslims in India had a way of life which was different from Muslims of other countries. Thus, Indian Muslims, Badayuni points out, think very ill of divorcing one's wife, something which was very common in the Muslims of other nations. In Nijatul Rashid, one of the texts which he had compiled, a theoretical text, he points out that though muta, that is marriages for limited period, and divorce by the husband are permitted by Muslim law, but, and I quote him, what good custom have the people of India that they shun this practice and regard it as the worst word of abuse? So much so that if someone is called talaqi, that is a divorcee, he out of folly would be ready to fight to death, unquote. By this period of time, India came to be recognized as a distinct entity. Nizamuddin Ahmad, who in 1593-94 completed his Tabaqat-e-Akbari, designed his account to give the annals of certain regions of India, for example, Delhi, Deccan, Gujarat, Malwa, Bengal, Jaunpur, Kashmir, Sindh, Multan. He was not giving the history of the dynasty, the Mughal dynasty. He was giving the history of a nation. So was the case with Muhammad Qasim Farishta, who extended this attempt to reconstruct even the pre-Islamic history of Hindustan. The concept of India under Akbar went much beyond a purely territorial one. To understand the concept of India under Akbar, one would have to understand what Abul Fazl wrote of it in his Akbarnama and its appendix, the Ain Akbari. Let us start with what was the geography of this country according to Abul Fazl. In the north, Abul Fazl considered the great mountain ranges to separate India from Turan, that is Central Asia, and Iran on the one hand, and China, that Chin, Wamachin on the other. And I quote one of the passages from Abul Fazl. Intelligent men of the past have considered Kabul and Kandahar as the twin gateways of Hindustan. One, that is Kandahar, for the passage to Iran, and the other, that is Kabul, for that to Turan. By guarding these two places, Hindustan obtains peace from the alien, that is raiders, and global traffic by these two routes can prosper. Abul Fazl considered India to be a peninsula, with its east and west and south bound by the sea, and the landmass on the north. Abul Fazl further claimed that Hindustan also included what he says Sarandip, that is Sri Lanka, Achin, that is Sumatra, Maluk, that is Malaya, Malacca, that is Malacca, and many islands. Is it not similar to the concept of Akhand Bharat which we keep on hearing today? Abul Fazl, very interestingly, details the qualities of people of Hindustan. God-seeking, generous-hearted, friendly to strangers, patrons of learning, lovers of asceticism, truth-seeking, etc., etc. Worth noting is what Athar Ali Saab pointed out. Abul Fazl assigns the God-seeking qualities to both Muslims and Hindus. They are qualities attributed to all Indians and not religion specific. Though some of them revere images, idols, they are not actually idol worshippers. And I quote Abul Fazl. He says, since images are used merely to assist in the worship of God. Abul Fazl recognizes India as the birthplace of an important culture, which found expression in an Indian language, Hindi. He goes on to give an account of India in the Ain, which he entitled Ahwal-e-Hindustan, the account of India, where he gives a very non-sectarian description of the country and describes the various religious sects, communities, and its sciences. He regrets that he has had no time to compare the Indian culture and its learned classes with that of Greece and Persia. His information on India as a country with its society and culture runs to about 150 pages and is actually quite accurate and detailed, covering secular learning, religion, ritual, and ethnography. In other words, Abul Fazl was looking to much beyond a parallel coexistence of cultures or to a composite traditional culture, a mere synthesis of traditions. Thus, he gives notices of foreigners arriving in Hindustan from Adam to Humayun, the many divines and saints which join together, purified by reasons. In all this, Abul Fazl also alluded to the essential role which lay with the sovereignty, and that is a different story altogether. I'm not taking up the views of Akbar as the sovereign, his policy of Sulhul and so on and so forth. Suffice to say that the concept and idea of India as a nation by the time of Akbar and Abul Fazl was almost completed. And that is why some historians tend to nomenclate the history of India from the time of Akbar as early modern rather than medieval. But this again is another debate. Thank you very much.
Kaushik?
Hmm. Uh, I would like to ask Ranamida to comment on Professor Rezavi's talk.
I'd be very,
Ranamida.
no, I'd be very happy to say a few words, though I'm not competent uh, in the range of sources he has cited and also his uh, very in-depth discussion, critical engagements of the with the sources. But usually, what I do in the Suchi program, first we listen to if there are questions, and then I may join. Kaushik may tell us. Uh, are there questions already from the audience?
No, 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 Ranamida. There is no question at present at all. So, if there is any question, we will ask Professor Rizvi. So, you may go on.
Uh, Thank you, Kaushik. And uh, it's, as usual, a great pleasure and also a learning experience whenever I hear my good old friend, uh, Professor Rezavi, whom I, I have always known him as Nadeem, right from the, I think, mid 1980s when uh, we became very close friends and, uh, in a way, co workers, co-travelers in critically understanding the pasts of the subcontinent. And I think at this moment, what Nadeem has presented before us is a very timely, a very thought provoking intervention on the mushrooming of peculiar and, in fact, harmful ideas about the Indic cultures and the markers of what is called Indianness in the recent decades by people whose main agenda is not only distortions of the past. It is expected that there will be distortions of the past by people who have no training in historical studies. If you need training in becoming a physicist, a, a researcher in, say, biochemistry or astrophysics or mathematics, computer science, rigorous training in understanding the past. No, first to understand what are the evidence we have. Because take, for example, what Nadeem gave us a very lucid explanation of the understanding of what we call India or Hindustan, right from say, the earliest use of the term Hidush in the inscriptions of Darius the First in 6th century BCE down to the time of the great mind called Abul Fazl. In between, he has talked about many things. None of us, we are hearing, was present when all these things happened. And how do you know about it? We know about it not by mere imaginations, or we merely cannot say we believe or we think. What we posit must be backed by the traces and the testimonies of the past. And testimonies do not mean that these are picked up suddenly by someone talking about, uh, say, uh, the Mahmud, the ruler of Ghazna, who made several expeditions, raids into India, North India, in the early 11th century, based on the accounts, say, of someone remembering him in 16th century. No. The period we would like to talk about must be described, analyzed on the basis of as near contemporary evidence as one could lay one hands on. And that is absolutely primary. The people who are clamoring about sort of the medieval darkness, aping the typical European understanding of, say, of 1940s or even earlier, that the medieval is always dark, and they are aping that kind of uh, idea and understanding of history into 2021. In fact, those who are telling that we are kind of providing the desi type of understanding of the past is doing nothing more than mimicking what the colonial masters gave us. And that came out very clearly in Nadeem's understanding. The other point is the people who are clamoring to sort of present a nationalist understanding of Indian history. Mostly these people are completely devoid of a craft of understanding the past, which we call historiography. And historiography is not a single strand of looking at the methods and critiquing the past. It is not merely to find some evidence and to place them in chronological order. Because what the historian like Nadeem is telling is an inquiry into the past, is an explanation of the past. The critical engagement of the historian with the past of his or her choice depends on the methodology, the critical acumen of the historian, which the historian develops by engaging also in the historiographical positions. There are several historiographical positions, and the historian has to explain why he or she is following a particular historiographical position in preference to other historiographical positions. That itself is a very analytical process, rather than suddenly finding out that what is dark, what is gloom, who is insider, who is outsider. So Nadeem, in a way, has shown by a critical engagement what is the understanding of the country, the culture, the emergent socio-political order of the land called either Bharatavarsha or Hindustan in a very wide range of primary sources, which, particularly in the case of the post 1000 CE, Nadeem is far more equipped than any of us to read those accounts in the primary, not only sources, but primary source languages, particularly Arabic and Persian. What we normally see is a translation of these ancient languages, like those who are clamoring for the great glory of Sanskrit language, yes, this is a great language, but very few of these people have any mastery over Sanskrit language except by quoting quoting from here and there, 5 lines, 2 lines in Sanskrit words without at all understanding the context. For a historian trained in historiographical positions, not only quotes the primary sources from different languages of different types, from texts, from coins, from excavations, from paintings, from court chronicles, from any other kinds of textual representation, but always is aware of the context in which such references came. And once again, Nadeem, true to the very rigorous training of looking at of remote period sources, typical of the training one gets in Aligarh Muslim University Department of History, and particularly the organization of CHS there, the Center for Historical Studies there, Advanced Center for Advanced Studies in the Department of History, bears all the hallmarks of these great assets. What we heard from him is an engagement with both primary sources and assessing, presenting the works of two of the most hallowed names from the Department of History, Aligarh Muslim University, Professor M. Athar Ali and Professor Irfan Habib, also preceding them, Professor Muhammad Habib. There were many such luminaries in that great department where I had the privilege of using their library and having numerous conversations with these stalwarts, Professor Habib, Professor Athar Ali, and also in those days, I was also young. Nadeem was also pretty young, along with Farhat Hassan, with Nadeem, with Najaf. We grew up in the training, in assessment of the sources, the contextualization of historical sources, a critical engagement with the sources, that it is not merely quoting, but trying to critically assess why certain authors at a particular period made certain comments. That's why Abul Fazl's comment in the court of Akbar, not merely speaking as a courtier in the Akbar's court, but also talking about his perception, his understanding of the situation in Mughal India. And that understanding of presentation of historical chronicling is coming from the notion of tariq, as is known in the then Islamic world of record keeping. And with this comes a various shades of his understanding of the situation in what is called Hindustan. And I would like to point out on my own take, because I'm pretty ignorant about what is happening in the post 1500 times. I read it only through secondary materials. But if I could say a few words, number one, as Nadeem has very categorically indicated, by the richness of the literary scholarship, not merely in the study of Islam or Islamic culture, the Islamicate, the Indo-Persian Islamicate scenario, but the understanding of the situation, say, of Amir Khusro, Isami, and Abul Fazl, these three he has come very prominently in his positions, that they considered Hindustan under different regimes as their native land. They were not considering themselves as an outsider. This is a peculiar situation which most of the so called experts on Indian history and those who try to obliterate the medieval as something dark and as if something to be wiped out, something to be erased, always telling, and if I am allowed to say a little bit strong word, this is not merely uttered by many persons nowadays who have no business to talk about history. They always say, I believe, I think, without being able to furnish any strong evidentiary position. But similar thoughts, unfortunately, came up even in the writings of the very famous historian Ramesh Chandra Majumdar. Ramesh Chandra Majumdar was a fully qualified historian who knew what he was pronouncing firmly on the basis of evidence. Yet, at the time of the independence of India and also partition of India, his stated position was that India is gaining its freedom after 1,000 years of slavery. This is a gross misrepresentation of the past for the simple reason the political face of Islam in India is certainly based on conquest, on raids, on the suzerainty expressed through military and other political apparatuses, as all other players in Indian political scene have done. There are no other ways to establish one's control. And if any invasions from what we now perceive as the borders of India, outside the present boundaries of India, if anyone comes into India as invaders, as leading campaigns, launching military campaigns, even as raids, along with the colonial rule from 1757 to 1947, they are doing a harm to historical studies. Because take, for example, I'm delighted to know from Nadeem that Amir Khusru, his father, came from Uzbekistan, and obviously he had something to as his profession. With the end of the rule of a particular ruler, he does not go back to his original homeland like all the sahibs used to do during the colonial period, going back to home after their, either as governor general or even as small officers, going back to home with lots of plunder, declared or undeclared, back to their home in Britain. This is never the case. To put in the same bracket any invasion, any political conflicts, including raids from what is outside the boundaries of present subcontinent, as equivalent to colonial rule and colonial capturing of this country, is doing a disservice to the historical studies. I'm very, very blunt, very categorical here. And that bogey is being continued by those people who have nothing to do with historical research. Nadeem will be able to give us any categorical name which Mughal officer or which officer of the Sultanate left India after their term or after they sort of went out of their service. Who went back? Which Mughal official went back, say, to Uzbekistan or to Samarkand? Beyond Kabul, beyond Badakhshan, who went there? They remained in India. Did Mir Jumla leave India after his term was over? Did he retire to some other country? So this is something, a very significant point Nadeem has raised. I'm not summarizing Nadeem's point because he has given us a very lucid understanding. I am asking certain questions to myself to other learned people who are listening to it. Take, for example, the term Hindustan. Where does it occur for the first time? When does it occur? It is the term Hindustan occurs, to the best of my knowledge, for the first time in an Pahlavi inscription of 262 AD coming from Naqsh-e-Rustam in Iran, the famous site where also which marks the memory of many other Iranian rulers like Darius I. And Naqsh-e-Rustam inscription of Shapur I, dated 262 AD, it's a trilingual inscription. One version is Pahlavi and the other version is Greek. That there for the first time the term Hindustan appears. In what context? The ruler says, I have conquered Hindustan. And the term Hindustan, obviously Shapur I of the Sassanid dynasty could ever conquer the whole of the subcontinent, even a tiny part of the northern part of the subcontinent. What is meant is, the context is, he is declaring his success against the Kushan Empire. And the Kushan Empire in those days, even at the time of its meeting its final death in the hands of the Sassanid ruler, had areas like Pushkpur, Peshawar, Tugran, and also the area of Makuran. Along with that, the name comes Hindustan. In Greek is India. And this Hindustan obviously means the lower Indus Valley, exactly as the first time the inscription of Darius described this. Herodotus described the term India or Hindustan, Hind or Hidush, in the sense of the lower Indus Valley. Then, with the greater knowledge of the subcontinent by the Greco-Roman, Greek and Latin scholars, by Arabic and Persian scholars, and later by later also the Chinese, their first introduction or acquaintance with the land of the subcontinent is through the lower Indus Valley. And from there, then the name expands. Hindustan, in the classical description, he has referred to several other texts. I would just add to the wonderful description of Hindustan by the late 10th century text on geography, Hudud al-Alam, the description of Alam or the whole world. And Hindustan is there bounded on the west by Mirhan, which is the river Sindh. Then to the east, it includes the areas of Harkira, which is Chittagong region, Harikela, and also Kamarun, that is Kamrup, and speaks of the Great Sea, Al-Bahr al-Hindi, which far precedes the understanding of the Indian Ocean in European languages, Al-Bahr al-Hindi. And Al-Bahr al-Hindi has the components of, say, Bahr Larvi, that is the Sea of Lar. Lar means Larter, Gujarat obviously meaning the area, what is present day, the Arabian Sea, and it also mentions Bahr Harkal. Harkal is Harikela, what represents the area around Chittagong, the southeasternmost part or easternmost part of Bengal Delta. So the Bahar or the sea associated with the name of Harikela stands for the Bay of Bengal. So this is the richness of, and this person who is an anonymous person, we do not know how he came to know. Is it by the understanding of the physical features of this vast land, by the other informants, by the travelers, by merchants, like Claudius Ptolemy formed the idea of India intraganjum, India extraganjum. We never came to India. And slightly later, the account of Al-Marwazi coming from Merv in Central Asia, eastern part of Central Asia, Merv, that is 1142. This person talking about Hindustan and also of China, speaks of even the remote areas as Kamrup, also the neighboring northeastern frontier of present day Indian India, is awareness of the contiguity of the areas of southern China, what is present day Myanmar, and the northeastern part is writ large. So the geographical configuration of the subcontinent is not only there in the very rich Sanskrit literature, it can be also seen in other kinds of Indic literature and definitely in Persian and Iranian Persian and Arabic texts. I have only one small query to two small queries to Nadeem. One is he is the best person to tell us when, as you very rightly point out, that they often use the word of the language and the people as Hindavi, the residents of Hind al Hind. In the translations by, and I think you are using Sachau's translation of Al Biruni. In that, the term, what is the actual term in the original source language? Is it the Hindavi? Hindavi as the people settling in the land called Al Hind. Is it that term? Because in English it becomes the Hindus, which often can be taken in the sense of a particular community. What is
Well,
actually the term?
the very good question. The term which Amir Khusro uses, and I have, as you rightly pointed out, used the addition of Sachau, and the spelling which he uses out there is He, Noon, Dal, Wow, Ye, Hinduvi. So whether you call
Exactly.
it Hinduvi or you pronounce
Exactly.
as Hinduvi or you pronounce it as we do Hindavi. I mean, the words which are there can give you these three transliterations.
Huh.
The
But
sense which
but tell me,
appears,
can it be straightforward translated? Because after all, this translated in 1910
yes,
when the book came out,
yes,
1910, and this is more than a century old. So, in that time, after all historians, we are all products of our time, of our surroundings, what we imbibe in social, cultural, political terms. In 1910, a translator uses the term, English term, Hindus. And by that, immediately, it can be sort of juxtaposed with someone else. And that
Mm,
is
no. The thing
you.
is, no, no, you're right. But there is one more thing which I would like to add,
Huh, huh,
that this term uh, Hindu,
huh.
uh, not Hinduvi, but Hindu, has been used by Zia Barni also in Tarikh Firoz Shahi.
Okay.
But whenever he uses the term Hinduan or Hindu, Hinduan is the plural,
Hmm, hmm.
he is meaning the village accountants and village, tax collectors.
Like the
Those,
caste, like the caste.
yeah, those indigenous people who are collaborating with the state in the collection of taxes. The
Exactly.
term Hinduan or Hindu is never used by Zia Barni in the sense of a whole community. The sense which has been
Exactly.
given to this term by Eliot and Dawson in their translations.
and
Right.
and you are far more aware than I do that in Eliot Dawson's translation, that is the history of India is told by its own historians. Eliot, who started the project, categorically says that I am showing these translations to demonstrate how Indians around mid 19th century are so better under the benign rule of East India Company compared to the earlier terrible Islamic rule when the people, original Hindus, suffered a lot. And he said that I am reminding the bombastic babus of English East India Company that how fortunate you are. So his project is very clear, very
Exactly.
clear, very
And
clear.
and uh, when the term Hindui or Hindavi or Hindi, whatever you transliterate it as, when this term is used by Amir Khusro, there also generally when people translate it into English, they translate it as a singular word.
Exactly.
Although if you actually read Amir Khusro, it is a plural word. The Indian languages, because when he defines Hindui or Hindavi, the languages, indigenous languages, that is, languages which are neither Arabic or Persian nor Sanskrit.
Exactly.
There he goes on to describe the dialects which are spoken in the Delhi region, which he calls as Dehlavi. Then
Delavi.
goes on to Kannada, goes on to other languages, and then he boasts that I too, although my origins are from
Kush.
Central Asia, though born in India, uh, I also compose verses in these indigenous languages, Hindu,
Exactly. Exactly.
right? So
Exactly.
the term Hindu or Hindavi, as is being invoked either in Amir Khusro
Hmm.
or in Zia Barni, or for that matter, any of these. I'll just give you one more example.
Yeah,
That
please.
when Nadir Shah came, invaded India, much later than when these people existed.
Right.
The massacre at Delhi took place,
Huh, huh,
large massacres, and
Kataleam.
yeah, and then the Mughal emperor sought mercy, and ultimately the murders were stopped. Now, Nadir Shah, when he was in Delhi, what term does he use for the Mughal emperor or the Mughal dynasty? He says Hinduane Kalmago. Those Hindus who also recite Kalma, he never says that they are Muslims. He says those Indians who are also reciters of Kalma, Hinduane Kalma. So this term Hinduan for the Indian people, indigenous people, continues up till I can say the 18th century, starting from when it was being used, as you rightly pointed out, gave examples from the ancient period. The type of examples which you gave generally come from those who were outside the country. I mean, the Greeks, the Persians, the others, they were
Huh, huh.
identifying the people of certain locality and giving them a name. It was the
Exactly.
identification of us by the foreigners. The term Hindustan was being used for a specific geographical locality by those who were the outsiders, the foreigners. Uh,
Exactly. Exactly.
and naturally, I mean, when Al Baruni is using Al Baruni, by in no sense of the term is an Indian.
No.
He came along with the conqueror Mahmud of Ghazna. He remained
Huh,
in India for some time, for around, it is said,
huh.
it is not very clear, for 10 years, but not more than 10 years. But then, so he is not an Indian. But Amir Khusro, if you read his No Seper, and I didn't have time to give
Huh.
all his verses, he keeps on going on and on, uh, 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 telling about his pride, how he is an Indian, a person who is from India, a
Exactly.
land which is chosen by God. Right
Exactly.
now, this is. I'll just give one more
Please go
example.
on. Please go on. It's very
I'll
enlightening. Please
just
go on.
give one more example. I'll come to Akbar's period. I mean, Akbar, I'm giving an example because these days Akbar too is being maligned. Traditionally, we knew that there were three Saturns of medieval India: Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna, Feroz Shah Tughlaq, Babar, and Aurangzeb. Four, in fact, Saturns. But now, recently, in the last 2 years, even Akbar has been added to that. That how he was a rapist, how he was killing the Hindus, and so on and so forth. There is a painting. You remember that I think all of you who have not even read medieval India, they know that very early in the reign of Akbar, Adham Khan, the the foster brother of Akbar,
Right.
the son of Mahamanaga, the foster mother of Akbar, became too powerful. He was in Gujarat, in other places. He violated the rules. He was recalled back. And out of frustration, he once entered into the palace complex and attacked one person who was supposed to be a father figure to Akbar. And then Akbar came out, had a duel with him, and asked his servants to throw him down from the ramparts of the palace. Now, the painters of the Akbarnama, the copy of which is in Victoria Albert Museum, those painters who depict this scene, they show Akbar wearing a dhoti. The Indian. Similarly, we have images, official images, Jahangir wearing a dhoti. In fact, if you do not know his face and you are unable to recognize him, you will think that there is a Hindu gentleman sitting out there. So, and then even a writer like Abul Fazl, throughout his Akbarnama, is using words which are Hindavi words, Indian words,
Exactly. Exactly.
throughout the period. And by Akbar's period, the Central Asian Turki was no more the mother tongue.
Exactly.
Persian
What was
became
that? Yeah.
official
What
English.
was originally
Yes.
the language of writing Babul's
And
autobiography is gone.
yes, and
Turk is
within the
gone.
within the Mughal imperial household, it was the Hindavi language which was being spoken.
Exactly.
You know, so what I today was trying to point out is that this concept of India, which Nehru put forward, which Ambedkar put forward when he drafted the constitution, the concept with which Mahatma Gandhi came and fought the freedom struggle for the Indians, that concept of Indianness started developing from 13th century onwards. And that concept of an India where both Hindus and Muslims, where all type of religions were taken together to be members of the same nation by the time of Akbar was well established. I'm not going into the period of Shah Jahan or to Dara Shikoh or to Bahadur Shah Zafar or to other people. My aim today was just to show that in spite of the fact that it was the foreigners who gave this name Hind or Hindustan, although it was a term which was derived from the Greek and the old Persian,
Persia.
but by the time these sultanates were established, by the time a ruler like Alauddin Khilji was ruling over this country, a person who has been recently shown as a savage, by that time, India as a concept is a place where all type of people are there. Even under Alauddin Khilji, we hear of Thakur Pheru, who is the mint master of Alauddin Khilji. We are not talking about Akbar's period. Generally, the textbooks would say it is with Akbar that all type of appointments started. I am giving you example of Thakur Pheru, and there are
Thakur
works
Peru.
of Peru which survive, and
Exactly.
at least one or
Ah,
two of them have also been translated and published in English. For example, that famous Sanskrit scholar Sarma, S.R. Sarma, uh,
S.R.
he was
Sharma. I know about him. Yes.
professor at Aligarh Sanskrit. He has edited,
Ah, ah.
translated this work of Thakur Peru, which is available for all of us
You
to.
mean the
It is not
you,
Alauddin
you mean the
Khilji who.
Drabya? Ah,
Pardon?
you mean the Drabya Pariksha, the essay
Yeah, yeah,
master
yeah, yeah.
Thakur Peru's
No, it
work?
is not Alauddin who
Yeah,
is
Drabya
claiming that
Pariksha.
I recruited the non-Muslims. It is Thakur Peru who says that I am the mint master, the imperial mint master
Exactly.
at the
Mint
Indian.
master.
Right, right.
Exactly.
So this whole
Exactly.
process where all of us were living together started from 13th, 14th centuries, and by 16th or late 17th centuries, we were existing as a nation where none of us was a Hindu or a Muslim. And if you don't believe me, please visit the capital of Akbar, Fatehpur Sikri. Don't
Yes.
go by what the guides are saying. Just lift your
I know
eyes,
you are the best
look at the
person.
walls. Look at the walls. You will realize
Exactly.
that what type of India existed in the eyes of a Mughal emperor like it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. No,
They,
I entirely agree with you. The interesting, because those who are talking about the sort of the great glory, and it appears now from the general perception of many Indians that you look into the past only to find out your lost glories, pride. They fail to understand if there is the element of pride, there is also the element of prejudice. They always go hand in hand. And
Uh,
historians, we do not establish glory of such period or ingloriousness of another period. We try to explain the past. If something happened, why and how it happened. It is not merely to establish who is great and who is not
who
so
is
great and
great,
who is the
right?
villain. That is the
Nilanjan
terrible,
ji,
terrible situation
Nilanjan ji, there
going
is,
on.
you asked
Ah,
about any indigenous writers. One of them I just named Thakur Peru, who in
absolutely.
things have a very different concept of India, different, I mean, from what we are trying to uh, do during the 21st century. He is talking about an India where he's not talking about Hindu kings and Muslim subjects, where he's talking about a place where both of them are having some say in the Sultanate. I would also name a large number of Hindu writers from the Mughal period. Being, a student of Mughal Empire, I'm sorry, I won't be able to give you many examples from Sultanate or earlier period. But as far as the Mughal period is concerned, there are writer after writer, author after author. For example, Bhim Sen, Isar Das Nagar. Hmm.
It's understandable.
There are many others. For example, take both Bhim Sen and Isar Das Nagar. They are what we can say the parts of the Mughal bureaucracy. They are in Mughal service. Or for that matter, take a person like Surat Singh. Not many of you have heard about Surat Singh. Surat Singh was, a very petty officer, not, of a lower grade, a clerk, very small clerk, living in the region of Lahore. He's writing, a versified account for his saint, Pir Hasuteli. So he is writing a taskira, and as I just pointed out, that during that period, the language Persian was having the same position as English is today. So every literate person would write in Persian, whether Hindu or Muslim, male or female, you would be considered literate only if you are, and that continued up till 19th century, by the way. Now, Pir Hassu Teli, when he's, although basically he's talking about his saint, but then he's also talking about his own experiences as the bureaucrat of the Mughals posted in Punjab. And if you read that, and fortunately, at the during the period when I was the chairman of the Department of History, I
Yeah, you have
published
published that. You have published Surat Ali
that is
previously.
available for all of us to
Surat
see
Si.
the terms and ways in which the Surat Singh is
Surat Si.
uh, writing about the polity. Bhim Sen, Isar Das Nagar, discussing Aurangzeb, not Akbar. They are critical to Aurangzeb, but never critical to him on those issues which we highlight today. He is critical on the sense that he is following a policy of Qilagiri, not Mulkgiri. I don't have time to explain all that to you, but there are sufficient number of non-Muslim indigenous, or you may use the term Hindu writers of that period, who also write similarly to what I told you about Amir Khusraw to Abul Fazl.
There another question from Mursid Alam.
Yeah, what does he say?
Apart from Badauni, any other Muslim thinker writing about Indian Muslims as different from others? How did Adrawal, the medieval Muslim scholars, conceptualize Islam vis-a-vis Islam in Arab countries?
Oh yes, there are many. I have chosen just the official historian, Murshid Alam. Unfortunate thing is that today there are not many scholars who know Persian. Uh, uh, you know, people at Aligarh, we keep on claiming that scholars at Aligarh know Persian. Unfortunately, let me reveal you the small secret that even at Aligarh, there are not many scholars who are actually well versed in Persian. Maulana Azad Library at Aligarh itself has a large number of accounts which are by scholars, mystics, theologians, scribes, which have just been scratched on the surface. But whatever reading I did during the period when I was doing my research, I can very simply answer you that there are a large number of 16, 17 writers. I don't know about the previous period. 16th, 17th writers who are both theologians, mystics, and others who talk about the Indian Muslims to be distinct from the Muslims of the other nations, say Central Asia or other places. Also, remember the fact that at the time when the Ottomans were claiming to be the Khalifas, remember the type of attitude which Akbar had towards them. The whole idea of caliphate was spurned by the Indian Muslims. So much so that even till the modern period, when
Absolutely.
Taliban
Absolutely.
and the others were creating havoc in Europe and Central Asia, the Indian Muslims remained quite aloof from all that till at least very recent years. So this fact of Indian Muslims being distinct from other places has been pointed out by a number of writers.
Number.
Sir, with the commencement
There are
of
only two
Mongol,
questions left. Mongol
was
conquest in the Islamic heartland was India, especially Delhi, accorded the same stature as was of the Baghdad.
well, the Indians never considered Baghdad, as I just said that whether it was the Sultan, they never cared for the Khalifa of Baghdad, only Iltutmish, at the time when he was trying to conquer power, when he had nothing with himself, even in fact, when he was yet to be manipulated, he had sent some money to the so-called Khalifa at Baghdad to get a letter from him. And after that, once he became the Sultan Iltutmish, the Caliph of Baghdad, or later on of Ottoman Turkey, were never invoked by the Indians.
Exactly.
It was
Exactly.
only in 1920,
Never.
and that too because we were fighting against the colonial Britishers, and because Ottomans were also fighting the Britishers.
Fighting
That
against
some
the
Indians.
Britishers. That's why
That is
Khilafat
why
for
movement.
Khilafat,
otherwise,
for Khilafat movement.
otherwise Baghdad or any of those places had no meaning for us.
Doesn't matter. The last question is uh, were the Muslim authors fascinated with the culinary peculiarities, oddities of India?
There is a I'm not a culinary historian, but I like good food, so I keep on reading. So I can just say that there is one Taskira, a book of biographies of Mughal nobles, Zakhiratul Khawanin, which was uh, published uh, from Pakistan. Unfortunately, I don't think that there is any Indian edition of that book, although an English translation of Zakhiratul Khawanin was carried out by Ziauddin Desai, and that is very much available, Zakhiratul Khawanin. Now, this is a text on which the famous work of Shah Nawaz Khan, Masrul Umara, is based. In fact, passage after passage are lifted from Zakhiratul Khawanin and copied by the author of Masrul Umara. And the fact that because he is writing at a later date, he also adds to that. Zakhiratul Khawanin, the biography of the Mughal nobles. In fact, the author of Zakhiratul Khawanin, Sheikh Farid Bhakkari, was a contemporary of Shah Jahan, Jahangir and Shah Jahan. He died during the period of Shah Jahan. Now, when he is giving the accounts of the nobility, some of the people of the royal family as well, he keeps on mentioning the type of food which was preferred by them. What type of food did they have? And if you read this Zakhitul Khawanin, you would find that a large number of Indian foods are invoked. That very famous manuscript from Malwa, which is illustrated. I'm forgetting the name. I have also written a paper on the culinary, recipes of that book. I'm forgetting the name. 14th, 15th century Malwa text, which deals with the, it's an illustrated one with, you would find that a large number of Indian recipes were copied and added to. For example, from 14th century down to the Mughal period, one thing which happened was the Indian betel leaf, pan, which started having a national character. So much so that when the European merchants would land at Surat, at least 4 or 5 of them write that their first impression was that Indians have some sort of a mouth ulcer because they keep on throwing blood. Hmm. Uh, the betel eating. So much so that by the Mughal period, offering pan was something which was of status. Khichdi. Hmm.
Exactly.
That when we fall ill, we have khichdi. Khichdi became the preferred dish of the Mughals. Every second, noble was having khichdi. Meat was there, of course, which has nothing to do. Even if we forget Dien Jha and the holy cow, and if we take meat to be Muslim, there are a large number of recipes given in that Malwa text and in Zakhiratul Khawanin, as well as in other sources, for example, like Abul Fazl himself sometimes mentions these dishes which are there. All of them, most of them
I,
are also
I think you were
vegetarian.
mentioning, Nadim ji, you were mentioning about the Malwa text. It is
Yes,
probably
I'm
Niyamat Nama. Yeah, Selim
Nemat.
has just now written
Yeah,
Niyamat Nama.
Nemat,
Yeah,
Nemat
Selim
Nama, Nemat,
from presidency,
Nemat
Selim
Nama.
Javed, our friend, mentioned.
It's so
Yeah.
stupid on me because in the Bhopal Indian History Congress, I had written a paper on that, but possibly age makes me forget things. So I had totally forgotten the name. It is Nematnama, which is
Yeah.
illustrative. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. And I
So
must
very,
mention,
very highlight. In fact, the dresses,
hmm,
everything, the whole culture. I think what is actually wrong in the teaching of history, both at Aligarh and JNU. The elite institutions of India. We give much more importance to trade, commerce, economy, but we somehow keep on missing culture. If you look at the emerging cultural trends of medieval period, you will be surprised to see that the intermingling of Hinduism and Islam was, at a very large extent. We started having same type of dresses. The only thing is that today also I am wearing a kurta. A Hindu would also wear a kurta, but a Hindu would be wearing a dhoti. I am wearing a pajama, which you can't see at the moment. There are differences. So in Mughal dress also the same type of jama. Remember, jama is first found in Kanishka's, that sculpture,
Hmm.
same type of coat,
hmm.
which is found.
In the Mathura sculpture.
Uh, uh, Yes,
In the
the
Mathura
only
sculpture.
difference is that the Hindus from right or left and the Muslims from the other side. That was some difference, but same type of dresses started evolving. Same type of food started evolving. In fact, there are certain texts about culture, yeah, especially from Uttar Pradesh, which I studied, where the social culture among the Hindus and Muslims appear to be the same. Uh, Birth of a child, the marriage ceremony. Hmm. There are, same type of cultural traits started developing up. If you are reading the text and if the name is not given, or for that, Gujarat is so famous today. In Gujarat, there are Bania merchants, the daughters of Bania merchants getting married, and there is a reference to meher, which is being paid to them. So there is an imbibing of Muslim social, cultural, religious trends by the Hindus, and vice versa, which is happening during this period.
Vice
Let us
versa.
let us also give some importance to those assimilative features and stop talking only of the divergences. Also remember, I mean, there is an article by Christopher Bailey about riots in India. I also wrote an article on riots in India, and Najaf Haider has also written about riots in India. One thing which is very spectacular is, in spite of what Bailey has tried to say, that throughout the medieval period, at the social level, there's not a single communal riot which is reported, except one which took place in Gujarat, if I remember correctly,
Ahmedabad.
during the
Ahmedabad.
reign
Ahmedabad.
Ahmedabad during the reign of Aurangzeb. But what is to be marked is that the state of Aurangzeb punished the Muslim party and safeguarded the interests of the Banya merchants who were Hindus. This whole division and riots and communal tensions were something which started developing only from the 18th century onwards. I'm not saying that there were no tensions. Tensions are always there. Clashes were always there, but not at a community level, communal.
Uh, I want to inform everyone, please fill up the feedback form for today's talk. Here is the link at comment box. And as Ratnabolidi mentioned, I would like to say that the congratulations Nadeem ji for an erudite and enjoyable talk. And you took me back to Aligarh on a time machine which was equally enjoyable.
Thank you,
So
Nadeem.
basically, yeah, so basically, uh, this is a really illuminating and integrated, very thought-provoking lecture talk. And with the presence of Ranobidda, it was always definitely it goes to another level with Professor Radeep Rizvi and Professor Ranobi Chakraborty. So thank you both. And I would like to mention on 12th of November, uh, our most important two lectures we organize each year, Professor Chintaharan Chakraborty Memorial Lecture and Professor Gautam Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture. And on 12th November, will be delivered by Professor Kumkum Ray on 12th of November. And in the mid of December, Professor Tanika Sharkar will deliver the Gautam Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture. So please follow us at YouTube, at the Facebook page and Facebook group, and be with us. And wishing you a very happy Diwali to all of you.
Uh,
Thanks
Before you close,
again.
I just
Yeah,
one word before you close, and that is I
sure, sure, sure.
request all the participants who were here today that please also join us in our efforts at ASHA. We keep
Sure.
on holding our lecture series on Saturdays at 7 p.m. in the evening. And all those lectures by different historians are aimed at, a history, understanding of a history shorn of all religious biases. This Saturday, I would be in discussion with Attilio Petruccelli on Fatehpur Sikri. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's great.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone. So,
Yeah.
good night and have a nice
Good night. Take
Chocolate.
care, Nadeem. It was great to see you. And be well, stay fit, and
Thank you.